welcome to session 6 of our Brand Alive brand expansion webinar series. We're so glad that you guys could be here. And like Pete said, my name is Ella. I'm the digital media manager for Brand Alive. Like you said, I'm just going to do some introductions. I'm honored to be here with you guys this morning. So we're going to start with everybody on mute just to cut back on some of that background noise, but please feel free to unmute yourself at any point to ask a question. You can also ask questions in the chat if you need to, and of course we'll have at the end an open Q&A where you guys can ask all of your questions. And you can go ahead, actually, everybody, if they want to jump in the chat, let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from, what it is you do. We'd love to get to know you a little bit better, and also let you guys get to know each other a little bit better. So while you do that, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Pete Cantalicchio. So before earning his MBA at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and starting his business career, Pete attended the U.S. Naval Academy and served in the Navy as an award-winning aviator and instructor pilot. Pete then began his brand expansion journey at Coca-Cola in 1997 as the event licensing group manager, where he executed multiple programs in support of the Olympics, major NASCAR events, and the FIFA World Cup. From 2005 to 2007, Pete served as director of global licensing for the Rubbermaid brand, and in 2018, Pete brought his message to an even wider audience through his award-winning book, Expand, Grow, Thrive, which achieved the #1 new release ranking on Amazon. So thank you to Pete for being here this morning. For those of you who don't know, he's joining us from his vacation, so we're so thankful for that. And I'll go ahead and I'll hand it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Ella. Really appreciate that. We wanted to share a little bit of my background for those of you who don't know me, as well as some others who are more familiar. So I'm excited to jump in today and talk about this new next webinar, which is about this concept of addictive brands. And when we think about brand expansion, we think about how great brands really share their lives or their universes in our lives, and that's what makes them so special to us. And so let's just jump in and talk a little bit about how we kind of got here. We've been talking for a few weeks about the Lasso framework and methodology, and the Lasso framework is something that I co-created with a gentleman named Mark DeSoma, who's a brand strategist out of Wellington, New Zealand. Lasso stands for lateral, addictive, storied, scalable, and ownable. And it's a framework used to help brand owners, brand stewards determine whether or not their brands are optimally expanded. And so there's really 3 ways of thinking about the use of this model. So if you're an expert, the model helps you prioritize your intellectual property. Which of your brands have the greatest capacity to expand, maybe which are optimally expanded and just need to be maintained, and then others that potentially could be overexpanded that you might want to actually curtail a little bit so that you can maximize your resources. But if you're a brand owner and you're not an expert, this algorithm that we created can help you just determine the expandability of your brand and help you understand where to take the brand and determine what are the best routes for maximizing your brand's expansion, which means your brand's engagement. And so how do you really make the universe optimal for your consumers, for your fans, for your enthusiasts? But if you're neither of those two, the framework can still be a relevant and useful tool in running your business, because there's lots of questions that we ask that challenge you to think about your brand in a way that you may not have done before. And when you go through that mental exercise of thinking about the questions posed and potentially answering those, you're just going to be better equipped to actually be able to run your brand's overall program and therefore be more successful. So today we're talking about addictive brands, and as I mentioned earlier, the first part is the lateral. We talked about that last week, which is moving from category to category, and addictive is the second critical variable in the model. So the question that gets posed immediately is, how do you measure addictiveness? And this is something that is kind of a balance between scientific and art. So the way that I like to think about it is, if you answer yes to these questions, you likely have an addictive brand. So first off, does the brand urge consumers to choose it wherever they find it? Do consumers come after the brand wherever they find it? And I want you today to think about brands that you love, that when you see it, that you go after it. So for some of us who live in the United States, especially the southeastern part of the United States, there is a brand called Chick-fil-A. It's a quick service restaurant, fast food restaurant, that I love. And wherever I see it, I want to go after it. That's an addictive brand for me. And the interesting thing is, I don't like any of the other quick service restaurants. So if one of the things about Chick-fil-A is that they choose to not be open on Sundays. And we're always disappointed if we're on a road trip on a Sunday because there's no Chick-fil-A. And the alternatives, which might be Burger King or McDonald's or Wendy's, they're just not on the table. We have to find something else. Next, do they want to return time and time again to experience the brand? So I have this little game I play on my iPhone called Ruzzle, and it's a puzzle game. It's a word game, and I'm really addicted to this game. I use it to stimulate my brain, but also to calm myself down at the same time. And so I'm constantly going after this, and whenever I have a little bit of free time, going back to enjoy it. And I'll get into a little bit of the reasons why I enjoy it as we get further into the presentation. Next, does the next experience build on what they already know? So we want brands, addictive brands are familiar to us, but what they also offer is a little bit of newness, right? Surprise. And so you don't want to be caught off guard with your brand. So many of you may be fans of Starbucks, right? One of the best reasons that Starbucks is so popular is the consistency of what you experience, whether it's the products themselves, which may not be the best ever that you've drank, but are still very, very good. But the atmosphere is part of it, and the engagement is part of it. So the consistency allows us to be comfortable with the brand. And have they created a repeatable model? And so I've talked about going back time and time again to Chick-fil-A. I've talked about playing Ruzzle time and time again. I've talked about, and I do drink Starbucks. It's not my favorite brand of coffee, but I enjoy it enough that I'll keep coming back. And one of the reasons it's so repeatable is their app, right? It's so easy to use. And so we'll find ourselves lots of times using the app to order, and then getting in the car and driving around and picking up and not having to wait as long. And of course, they love it too, because I'm already spending the money before I even get my product. And then finally, if none of these, if you haven't answered yes to these, what elements are missing that could enhance your brand's addictiveness? So hopefully you've done your own little mental mind checklist in your mind as I've gone through these and say, yes, my brand encourages consumers to choose it wherever they find it. Do they return time and time again? Well, maybe not as much. Does the next experience build on what they already know? Yes. So if you're going back and forth through this, maybe then you've kind of left yourself in a position where you can say, okay, what could I do to enhance my brand's addictiveness? So what does addictiveness do for a brand? It ensures the brand has bankability. It ensures that the relationships that are created are long lasting and that there's engagement. And so the consumer, the fan, the enthusiast loves what the brand is offering and therefore wants to keep coming back and enjoying consuming the brand. And so that makes the brand very, very strong in the mind of that consumer. And we talked about previously the hierarchy, you know, the first thing is awareness, then it's trial, then it's preference, then it's loyalty, then it's insistence, and then it's advocacy, right? If you have an addictive brand, the likelihood is in the mind of the consumer, you're either loyal, you're insistent, or you potentially are even at the advocacy level. The fans are talking about your brand with other people and encouraging them to consume it. So I love this little kid's face. He is so happy, right? Addictive brands are the ones which consumers can't get enough of. What do I mean by that? Consumers may become addicted because they love what these brands stand for, right? So not just what they do in the aspect of our consumption of them, but the representation of the brand with us. I talk a lot about Apple. I'm a big consumer of Apple. I have an iPhone. I have a Mac. I use their music. I love what Apple stands for, and so it is a reflection of me. Consumers want more of the experience that they are offered, right? Every time I go, it's a new experience. There's a myriad of choices of the way the letters are laid out in the game. Some of them have different scoring. It's just like playing Scrabble. So that, I can get a double word score, a triple word score, a double letter score, triple letter score. And so I get to compete with other people in the game. It's once a week I play, and there's 20 people in the total. So I'm competing with 19 others. And it's just the sheer fun of seeing how much better I can do. And so I love the experience. Consumers want to be more involved in what they see as the brand's world, right? So think about the greatest brands that you love and enjoy, and we're going to get to some case studies in a little bit. But I have a friend who actually owns a coffee brand called Brash, B-R-A-S-H. And I want to be more and more involved in this brand's world. So I've been kind of disappointed lately because of the pandemic. I have not been able to go to my favorite Brash coffee shop. He's had to shut it down. He does offer pickup, but we're not able to go into the shop itself. And that's part of the world that he's created that I got to be part of, and I'm really missing it. Finally, whatever the incentive, these brands play more to people's sense of what's out there, what's exciting them, what they want more of. And so you can think about brands in your own mind. Which are the ones that you want to engage with all the time? Those are the brands that are addictive. So let's talk about 5 reasons why certain brands exert such an influence on people's lives. First off, pursuing them is fun, right? They don't want to miss out. I've told you about a couple of my own examples, right? I want to get back to these brands as much as I can because whenever I go, I have a great time. And a great time might be literally physically consuming it. In the case of Brash Coffee, it might be just hanging out with friends at the coffee shop. It might be playing the Ruzzle game. It might be what I do. And I've talked about Coca-Cola as a brand that I love. But Coca-Cola is about happiness. And so the experiences that I have when I'm pursuing that brand typically is around happy and fun moments. Secondarily, now is everything, right? What are the things that are peaking now that are generating the interest that are driving you to consume them? There was a show on Netflix recently that my wife got really caught up in. It's called Schitt's Creek, SCHITT apostrophe S Creek. And it's about a family that had tremendous wealth. They lost everything. And now they're living in Schitt's Creek, and it's set in Canada. And all the actors are Canadian, and the writing is fabulous. The acting is fabulous. The setting is fabulous. And it's kind of like, to me, and I've told her this, I wasn't consumed in it like she is. She's absolutely addicted to the show, but I loved it. And I said, it's a lot like watching Seinfeld, right? Seinfeld has somewhat of a loose plot, but truth be told, every one of the shows are standalone. And that's the way it is with Schitt's Creek. And so she was watching everyone, and there were 6 series, and I missed a lot of them because I was doing other things. Now she's rerunning them, right? She's watching them over and over again. And for me, it's the first time going through them, and I'm enjoying the heck out of them also. But I can imagine in short order, this will be over and there'll be something else, right? So now is everything, and after which we'll move on. Availability is another reason we love these brands and why they have so much influence on us, right? I just talked about the fact that this program, Schitt's Creek, was available on Netflix, right? So that meant we could watch it whenever we wanted it, right? On demand. turn it on now, watch whatever show. We could watch season 6, the 3rd episode tonight. We could jump to season 1 and watch the 2nd episode. It doesn't matter. And so that hyper consumerism has encouraged us all to buy now. We're jumping into it. We want it. We consume it. I didn't watch, but a lot of people watched Tiger King the last couple of months. It bothered me because I was worried about what the people with those tigers, but for others, it was all consuming and they could not get enough of it. So you probably know what I'm talking about when I talk about the availability and now is everything. Curiosity, and we're going to get into this a little bit later in the presentation, but curiosity is so much what makes brands addictive. We have this natural sense about us as human beings of wanting to know more. And the more brands play on this element of curiosity, the more addictive they are to us. And finally, this thing around what I call hyper awareness, right? Access to the internet means we can get anything we want anytime. We live in this world of trends, likes, and connections. We're all trying to find out more and learn more and be aware of more. And so we're becoming aware. Hopefully we did a good job with making you aware of this webinar today. And so there were some things that are interesting to you that caused you to want to be part of it today and to listen and participate. And that's what great addictive brands do. They tap into that hyper awareness. So let's talk about a case study around Pokemon Go. And Pokemon Go, I would be shocked if you did not hear of it, right? But to me, it exemplifies the definition of an addictive brand. It launched in July of 2016 and became the summer's most popular distraction for millions around the world. And truth be told, it continues to be an incredibly popular distraction. You might say, well, it came and it went, and we talked about that just a few slides ago, right? But it's still addictive and still engaging with millions of consumers. So let's talk a little bit about what I call the STAR method and go through the situation, task, action, and results with the Pokemon Go brand. So first off, you need to know this was a licensing opportunity. There was a company called Niantic Labs that had a game they called Ingress. They created the game in 2012, and by the time in 3 years, they had 8 million downloads of this game. So that's a pretty popular game, right? Anytime you get over 1 million of anything, I would say it has a fair bit of popularity. So they created this game called Ingress, and in 3 years, they had 8 million downloads. Now, at the same time, the Pokemon brand itself had been around since 1996. It was established in Japan. It was owned by the Nintendo company and had become the #2 best-selling trading card game in creation, with over 21 billion trading cards created, sold, and traded. They also got into TV series, films, and all kinds of categories of merchandise. So what happened? Well, that was the situation. And the task was what Pokemon wanted to do, or what Nintendo wanted to do, was drive greater engagement of this addictive brand called Pokemon through the use of technology. And so what did they do? What was their action? Well, they teamed up with Niantic Labs, using the technology that was created in the Ingress game, which was augmented reality, to create this new game called Pokemon Go in 2016. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the results that came from this. In the period of 26 days, less than a month, they had over 100 million downloads. Let me repeat that number, 100 million downloads in less than 1 month. And they had generated $200 million worth of revenue. So I told you this had started in 2016. It was incredibly popular, and it was still popular today. Well, today they're still generating more than $10 million in revenue per day. That's in today, 2020. Now, it was so addictive that there had to be warnings posted, right? Because people were trying to find these little augmented reality characters, and they were walking into streets to do it, right? And putting themselves at risk of being hit by cars. They were stumbling in front of restaurants and blocking people getting into the restaurant. And so it was that addictive that people kind of lost their minds when they were playing it. Some of you who are on this call today may be nodding your head because you actually played the game and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Well, here's one of the most powerful statistics of the results of the success of the Pokemon Go. Nintendo's market value after the launch of Pokemon Go increased by over $9 billion. $9 billion. Is this brand addictive? 100%. Was it more addictive back in 2016 than it is today? Probably. But is it still addictive? 100%. Absolutely. So this is an example of a brand that met all of the criteria that I spoke about up until now. Okay, let's do another case study. This one is a simpler one, and it's more about the brand Winnie the Pooh over the lifetime of the brand. And so I want to share a couple little facts about it. So in 1930, a gentleman named Stephen Schlesinger purchased the North America rights for merchandise, TV, recording from a gentleman named A.A. Milnes, who had created the Winnie the Pooh character. And what was he wanting to do with that? Well, he wanted to promote the bear. He knew there was power in the Winnie the Pooh bear, and he wanted to create merchandise for sale, and he wanted to basically exploit or capitalize on all the rights that he acquired. So Schlesinger did that, and in his first year, which is back in 1930, he generated more than $50 million of revenue. So let's fast forward to today, and what does that number equate to? About $700 million in revenue in equivalent dollars in 2020. So I would say Winnie the Pooh blew up in a big way back in 1930 when Schlesinger acquired the rights. He licensed the Pooh character in almost every category, including dolls, records, board games, puzzles. Of course, we know all about the things that have happened with Winnie the Pooh. We're very familiar with this brand. This is a brand that everyone around the world knows. And part of the reason for that is because in 1961, Disney acquired the rights to the Winnie the Pooh brand. And of course, they've capitalized on this, and they made Winnie the Pooh one of the most well-regarded, most loved characters anywhere. Globally, they've achieved more billions and billions and billions of dollars of revenue around this brand. And you can see kind of where it went from A.A. Milne's idea of what to do with Pooh to Schlesinger's idea to ultimately what Disney did. And it was interesting for me doing the research on this when I was writing the book. I thought that Disney created this character because to me, Disney and Winnie the Pooh were synonymous. But I'm finding, and I learned even with like Mickey Mouse, Disney tends to find these great brands and then they acquire them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get further into the presentation. So, addictive brands are part of our everyday life. And you can see all the social media aspects and the way they engage with us. They're brands that buyers have easy access to. And of course, with social media today, that becomes almost synonymous. They reward us on a range of levels. I talked about the Ruzzle game, and my reward is just the sheer joy of playing, the surprise I get from the different sequences of the way I create the words, the scores, the competition. It's all a reward to me, and it costs me nothing. It uplifts us in a variety of ways, right? When you drink a great cup of coffee, like I do whenever I go to a brash, my whole day is set. I'm a better person because of that cup. And they tend to be consumer facing, right? Addictive brands are connecting with consumers and they give us an ongoing presence in our lives. And when they're taken away from us, we feel a little bit of a void. And lastly, they use their presence not just to grow their consumer base, but to actively enhance the revenue model through the brand expansion. And I talked about two examples just previously about Pokemon Go and the value, over $9 billion of value created for the Nintendo brand. And in the case of Winnie the Pooh, creating value for the founder, Milne, for the acquirer, Schlesinger, and then ultimately for Disney. So this is one of my favorite brands. It's absolutely an addictive brand. It's a brand that many of us know and love. And I want to take you back to 1977 when the first Star Wars movie launched. Back at that time, there was a gentleman named Mark Peavers who was working for 20th Century Fox. And I actually interviewed him for the book, and his story was really remarkable. But he was given the rights to the licensing of the Star Wars brand. Well, back in 1977, in early year, that might have sounded interesting, but there was no way possibly he could know what he was sitting on. But he saw a preview of the movie that was given, and he knew that there was something powerful here. And the reason he knew that was because in addition to the adults in the room that were watching this preview of the movie, some of them brought their children, and he could see that the children were mesmerized by the movie. And so he knew that there was something very powerful here. But he knew also that the Star Wars brand was an unknown entity. And because George Lucas did not want anyone to know anything about the movie, he wanted it to be a complete surprise. Mark Peavers was tremendously limited on what he could say about it. And therefore, he was kind of selling almost like vaporware, right? This was something he had to convince these prospective licensees about what they were getting. And in many instances, he struck out. Nobody really wanted to know anything about Star Wars. So his charge was to license the brand and maximize the categories of merchandise created and the royalty revenue to the 20th Century Fox company, who owned the licensing rights to the Star Wars brand. So Peavers thought, okay, what can I do? I'll go to the 1977 Toy Fair show in February, which is when it takes place every year, and I'll see who I can engage with. And he was shot down by many companies, but he ultimately connected with Kenner Toys. And if for some of you a little bit older, you probably remember the Kenner Toys name. It's a pretty well-regarded brand and company back in the day. And so he was able to convince them. The owner of Kenner saw the power in the brand and said, okay, I'll sign up for it. But I got to tell you, this movie is going to launch, and we are not going to be ready for Christmas, which is what they wanted to do, was to have toys available for the Christmas season. But what he said to them is, listen, what we can do is we can create cardboard cutouts. We can create of 12 figurines. We can create a diorama display, and we can give these kids on Christmas morning a little bit of a kind of a teaser on what's to come. And so Kenner and Peavers made a deal, and they signed up to do it. And I can tell you, the first run, 50,000 sets of these figurines, these action figures, were sold out. And everybody, all those kids on that Christmas morning did not get the action figures. What they got was this diorama and these carved cutouts. But they loved them. They loved them. And a few months later, the actual action figures showed up, and it was like a second gift, right? And I think for some people who got that and preserve that and have those in their homes, I can only imagine the value that that those are worth, those original figurine cutouts, the diorama, and the action figures. Some statistics on the results. In 1978, 40 million units were sold, generating over $100 million. And of course, since all 6 of the original Star Wars movies were shown, since that time, they've had more than $5 billion in box office revenue. And I'll get into in a second how much revenue that's been generated, royalty revenue and retail revenue. So let's talk about Disney, and let's talk a little bit more about the Star Wars brand and about the Marvel brand. So according to a gentleman named Tim Kilpin, who was a former Disney executive, who's gone to do even bigger and bigger things, he said, Star Wars is a brand and Disney thinks about it as such, just like they would any other brand. It is one thing to talk about Star Wars and Marvel as characters. It's another to understand each brand's full value. And this is just something that Disney did way ahead of all the other, let's call them film platforms, right? They always looked at it as the film was just one component of the overall universe of whatever brands that they owned. In this case, back in 2009 and I believe in 2012, they acquired both the Marvel brand and the Star Wars brand. And if I remember the statistics correctly, they paid approximately $4 billion for each. And The Force Awakens, which is their 7th movie, generated more than $2 billion in box office in just a couple of months. And by 2015, there was $3 billion of royalty revenue generated. In 2016, another $5 billion. And with Marvel, they've more than paid off what they paid for that property in multiples of 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 times. So Disney saw the value in these brands and then took them to the next level. And I'm imagining a few of you have seen these movies and have enjoyed them for all the reasons that we love anything that Disney does, pretty much. So what I like to share is that success is not limited to content only. According to Kilpin, who I just mentioned, a successful execution never just takes the form of a movie or television content. So there's merchandising, that's a big part of it. There's also how they choose the categories. Brands need to tie their programs back to a consumer perspective, and we know that Disney has done that quite well. And what he says is for long-lived characters, the brands must execute consumer research to understand which demographics is most connected to the brand and how, right? That's your target audience. And so for brand owners looking at gender or geography, for example, Donald Duck in France does incredibly well. And just to reaffirm what I was saying earlier, Disney looks at brand equity scores to evaluate its brands and conducts proprietary work, proprietary research to glean information so they can connect with their consumers in a way that gives the consumer all of the great things that great addictive brands do. So consumers want to leverage why they love their favorite characters. Here's an example with Simon Waters, who is the general manager of Hasbro's consumer products company, which is basically all of their licensed merchandise. He says it's about recognizing successes and then giving consumers every opportunity to play and engage with the characters in the universes. He says we take the consumer on a journey. To go further, he says, we are in every category. This is Hasbro. We're in every category you can imagine. Fashion, home goods, bedding, stationery, location-based entertainment, and Hasbro live theme parks, each expressing our brands all the way around the consumer. Expansion takes the consumer on a journey. They create these universes and they give the consumer, they give the fan, they give the enthusiast every which way to experience that universe, experience that world around the brand, and allow the consumer to go into the brand universe, stay for as long as they want, leave when they want, come back when they want, and have a phenomenal, wonderful experience. Now, all that said, some success remains a mystery. Things happen and things go crazy and people just don't know why. So an example of this is with Frozen, right? That movie, or Angry Birds, or Minions, or even Minecraft, these things were created, all the research was done, they knew they had all the right elements to make it successful, but they had no imagination. And I say they, these were the experts, right? These were the executives and their teams coming around going, we're putting all the elements together, we think this is going to be successful. But like in the example I told you with Pokemon Go, no one could imagine the overall success that would happen. And I think that's because of some internal elements that are going on in the minds of humans that are tapped into, that these brands get to connect with in ways that they didn't even know could exist. So I want to take a little bit of a side jaunt here for a second and talk about the model for the film industry, which used to be only about box office film revenue. And up until that point, for most brands other than Disney, box office revenue was the thing. It was 80, 90%. But today, it only makes up 52% of the revenue, because the way that the box office, or the way that these filmmakers are thinking about it, is we have to create a whole universe for the brand. And so that comes in the way of home video sales, pay-per-view, licensing, syndication fees, and merchandising. And so movie releases are timed, and we saw a lot of adjustments on the release times this year because of COVID-19, right? How are they going to get the movies out so that they could play at a certain time, have the consumers come into the theaters, and then begin to sell all of the rights in home video watching through the merchandise? And so it threw a wrench into all of this, because it is considered one overall program. So what the movies are trying to do is build this addictive interest and be able to sustain it and feed it, and then go into syndication and continue to nurture it. The goal is to broaden and deepen the involvement of the consumer beyond the point of entry. It's about extending the relationship the consumer has with the brand. And I mentioned earlier Schitt's Creek, and I mentioned how Schitt's Creek is a lot like Seinfeld. And here we are, decades after Seinfeld has, was created. It's still in syndication. People still are watching it. So here's one more case study. It's about the brand called Mind Candy. Many of you may not be familiar. Mind Candy is a brand that originated in the UK. I spoke to a gentleman named Darren Garnham, who's gone on to many, many more positions of influence and authority. But at the time when we were talking, he was the chief commercial officer of Mind Candy, and he was hired to start a licensing program for them back in 2009. And he recalls to me that there would be board meetings, and at the end of the board meetings, they would bring Darren in to talk about their toys sales, not their licensing program, but their toy sales. So his job was to expand the brand and drive royalty revenue. And what he wanted to do was take this very, very popular brand that was 100% digital and take it into the physical space. So they had a game called World of Warriors Duel. And they created for this game 120 characters. And from those 120 characters, they licensed with a company to create 120 action figures. And for every one of those action figures, they had to create weapons for them and accessories for them and books for them. And what happened after 18 months was they had 50% of their revenue coming from licensed merchandise. And after that 18 months, over $1 billion in retail sales were sold in the UK alone. And if you look at a royalty approximately of 10%, which we know is sometimes a little bit higher, a little bit low, but if you use that as a proxy, $1 billion in revenue created $100 million in royalty revenue. One more point that's really noteworthy here is, for some fans of the Mind Candy brand and World of Warriors, they became introduced to the brand through the physical, through the toys, and then later became fans of the digital. Whereas the game and the company started 100% digital, now they were actually driving people back to the digital through their licensed merchandise, which is a powerful story in and of itself. So I want to talk, I alluded to this whole idea of our minds and how we tap into certain things about ourselves. And so I want to talk about this gentleman who created this model. This was a professor named Fogg. And what he did was he designed a model that explained what it takes for humans to behave in certain ways. And what he said was, in order for behavior to happen, there has to be three things. There has to be motivation to do it, there has to be the ability to do it, and there has to be a trigger. So, for example, let's use an example with myself around skiing, right? I may be motivated to ski, but if I don't have the ability to ski, it doesn't matter if there's a trigger or not. But let's just say I am motivated. There is the ability. I know how to ski. And what's the trigger? I get together with a buddy and we talk about, the idea that we went skiing a couple of years ago and now we're missing it and we're going to plan a trip for next year, right? So I'm motivated to go skiing. I have the ability to go skiing. And the trigger is a conversation we have, which then causes us to plan a trip. So Fogg says that motivations can range from high to low depending on the activity. And we know that, right? We know that our motivations are either peaking or they're somewhat interesting. In the example back with Schitt's Creek, Emily, my wife, loved it. I was motivated to watch, but not nearly at the level she was. Secondarily, its ability is dependent on the individual. Something is either hard to do or it's not, right? I either know how to ski or I don't. My wife, Emily, does not know how to ski. She doesn't go on ski trips. She's not motivated to do it. So this is a guy's experience. And she's supportive, so that makes it even better. And finally, the trigger impels the action, or they fail to do so, right? When I have the conversations with my buddies about going skiing, that's either going to motivate us to go do it or it's not. So this is what Fogg talked about: motivation, ability, and a trigger. So let's go a little bit further here. For something to be addictive, there needs to be the right balance of willingness and feasibility, and there needs to be also sufficient triggers for what people want to do, right? So I talked about examples with the Russell game. I talked about Brash Coffee. I talked about the Star Wars brand. All of these are around willingness, feasibility, and the trigger to cause people to act. So going further, what I want to share is that the critical component to addictive behavior is newness and surprise, right? It has to be something new. It has to surprise us. It also has to be something that's familiar. So there's a natural curiosity as humans, and our wish to explore can be linked to a trait they call, or Fogg called, neoteny. And all neoteny means is we have this insatiable appetite for wanting to know more. I don't know about you, but when I was a small child, I used to go hiking in like this little wooded area of my home, and I'd follow along a creek. And sometimes I would look down and there'd be a rock down there, and I had to go down into the water and turn over the rock to see what I could find. And sometimes there was crayfish, sometimes there was salamanders, and sometimes there was nothing. But I had this insatiable appetite to want to know what was under that rock, and that's what Fogg calls this thing called neoteny. So how can smaller companies, and a lot of us represent smaller companies, take advantage of this addictive quality, right? So what suggestion is, like for licensees, right? Those are typically smaller companies who want to license a bigger, well-known brand, right? If they can create what Fogg calls an exploration bonus into their products, that will drive this addictive behavior, right? So for me, a lot of times I'll be playing this Russell game, and all of a sudden I'll come upon something that's unique, and it's kind of a bonus feature where I'll do something and I'll get extra points, which then allows me to score higher, which then allows me to be more successful. And if we think about Niantic Labs, when they created the brand or the game Ingress, right, which had 8 million downloads, and that was really successful, right? They thought, well, what if we were to partner up with Nintendo, with Pokemon? What could we do? Well, surely that would give us the ability to use our augmented reality to create something bigger. They had no idea that what they were going to create would be the biggest thing that ever had seen the planet in their lifetime. And so that's an example of a smaller company taking advantage of addictive qualities to create value. So let's talk about some key takeaways from this chapter on addictiveness. First thing, addictive brands play to people's appetite for more. Consumers are driven by the thrill of pursuit, the desire to be current, and the fear of missing out. Second, addictive brands tend to be consumer-facing, and many today have a strong media and social media profile that gives them presence in consumers' lives. right? We know that, right? We see that everywhere we go. We know the platforms that we watch, we pay attention to, and on those platforms, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, you name it, we are engaged with consumer-facing brands that many times we love. Third, it's easy to confuse the subject matter with the appeal. Remember, Star Wars may have been in space or taken place in space, but its addictive quality for audiences extended far beyond the science fiction genre. Truthfully, that kind of story could have been told in any world. In this case, they chose science fiction. Next, extending or expanding your brand requires taking a holistic approach to managing your brand properties in order to realize their full potential. What more do people want exactly? If you know what they want and you can tap into that, you're going to help make your brand addictive. Next, think about investing in categories that fit with the brand, but that also align with how and where consumers want to buy. We talked about Starbucks earlier, what they've done to create an environment that's addictive, how they created their online app that makes it easier for consumers to buy. And one other thing, right? We are a foster dog family. We took on a foster dog about 3 weeks ago. And one of the things that Emily, my wife Emily, loved about Starbucks is that when you order, they will create, I think they call it a puppuccino, which is just some, I think, whipped cream that they will give to you to give to your dog. And so that was one thing that they understood and tapped into, was that their consumers many times were owners of pets, and that they could offer up to the consumer, offer up to the owner something for their dog, which obviously encouraged, in the case of Emily and many, many others, a desire to buy from that company versus another. Characters make a brand addictive. However, what adds value and stickiness is authentic storytelling and or play value, right? So in the case of Winnie the Pooh, that's a great character who has tremendous story and also tremendous play value. And those three things come together and make it much, much more addictive. There's a brand out there called Hello Kitty, which is a cute character that I talk about in the book, Expand, Grow, Thrive, but that Hello Kitty doesn't have the backstory, doesn't have all of the interesting things that make it more enjoyable. Is it popular? Is it successful? Yes. Is it on the same planet as Winnie the Pooh? 100% not. Sometimes consumers will hook into properties and ideas that take even the most skilled veterans by surprise. And that's the power of serendipity. We saw that with Frozen. We saw that with Pokemon Go. Sometimes we just don't know what the mystery is, but the fog behavior model explains a little bit of it. Finally, everything today is about ecosystems. Increasingly, addictiveness is part of the financial model, not just the consumer relationship model. Okay. Let's look at the addictive expandability score chart. So if you have had the chance to buy my book, or have tapped into the Lasso model, you'll recognize that this is a score chart for addictive, which is the second element of the Lasso model. So if you were to say that your brand had an addictive level of 1, we would say there are only limited opportunities to interact with our brand. We tend to work on a quote unquote as required basis. Level 2, we need to find new ways to involve our consumers or customers more within our core category. We need to give them more reasons to come back to us. That would be a score 2. 3, we could be more inventive in how we involve people with our brand. We need to forge stronger links between what we continue to give them and what we ask them to continue to pay for. Right? That's that balance between freemium and premium. Number 4, our brand is compelling enough to expand into whole new areas and to take our audiences with us. We'll change our revenue model by continuing to surprise and delight via what they can access. Think about the Mind Candy example, where they had this tremendously popular, financially successful model, all digital. And then they brought in Darren Garnham and said, hey, help us create a brand licensing platform and help us bring this great brand into the physical space. And then ultimately what happened, not only was it tremendously successful where it generated equal amount of royalty revenue or equal amount of revenue, but it also drove consumers back to the original digital platform. Finally, number 5, our core business is just the starting point for a highly inclusive, engaging journey with our customers that spans all sorts of touch points. The journey is where we generate the real money. And if I look at that word journey, I go back to what was said by the Hasbro executive about what they do with their brands in that platform. So we're at the end of this talk. I'm hoping that you enjoyed it and found some things interesting. Again, there's this lasso model that we've created that gives you the ability to measure your brand's expansion optimality. I hope you will take advantage of that to give you some insights that you potentially did not have before. And of course, we'd love to have you join us, join our newsletter and become more involved. So let me stop sharing at this point and open up for some Q&A. Any questions? Or maybe comments? What did you guys think about some of the examples I used? Do any of those brands, do you find that any of those brands are addictive in your opinion? Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you as always, Pete. This is amazing stuff. I really, really appreciate all the different shows that you are on here, and this was as good as always. What do you find being the most challenging piece for people starting out as a new brand, a small brand currently, but wanting to move forward? Do you see a certain element being more challenging than the other, for instance?
Yeah, great question, Jan, and thank you for your comments. I do. A lot of new brands, including my own, right? As I create this brand alive experience, we always have that urge to be a little bit further ahead than we are, right? And we have to remember, if we look at the great brands out there today, there has been tremendous amount of time, investment, resources, revenue, research built into these brands to get them where they are today, right? I give the example of the Winnie the Pooh brand that was, created by this gentleman named Milne in the early, like 1920s, and then bought by Schlesinger in the 30s, and then ultimately got bought 3 decades later by Disney. And we look at that brand and we go, wow, look at what it's created. But in those early days, like many other characters, Milne probably didn't have any idea what was the potential, and he just was hoping that he could create something. And so I would say the biggest thing is having the patience to say, look, I know I'm doing the right things. I'm stepping forward in the right direction. I put discipline around what I'm doing. I understand my brand's promise. I understand why I do what I do before I figure out what I do or how I do it. And then I'm willing to put in the effort and not be impatient, but just take the time to let this thing grow over time. And when they do, I think they'll be rewarded. But that probably is the hardest part, is to try to stay patient.
I think also there's a lot of people out there with a lot of great ideas, and truth be told, at the end, not everybody is going to be successful. So it's definitely a big challenge, of course, there also, and it is very hard to find the sweet spots and the rough diamonds in the making and so on there. So I think from my perspective, a key element is also really surrounding yourself with great people that have sort of a similar vision and can take it and can be part of the brand's journey also, right?
Yeah, 100%, Johan. And you've done that. You're doing that with Entness, right? You've created this platform for professionals who all have a commonality about them, right? And you've created this world where they can participate at higher and higher levels and become more engaged. And of course, with our brand, we're just new to it, but we're seeing value already. And that is it, right? You put those elements together that allow for success, and then you nurture it, right? Sometimes it won't work out, but if you do the right things, oftentimes it will work out. And I commend you for what you've done so far.
Thank you. Yeah. It will be interesting in the future. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm excited for us to be a part of that.
Yeah, likewise.
Who else? Bob, any thoughts on what was shared today?
I really enjoyed those last comments about what's most important. Um, you really need clear disciplines during that initial part when you get distracted and unhappy with the growth. If you don't have clear disciplines, you'll start jumping to everything that comes around, and it's a big mistake. You need to have clear disciplines that keep you focused on a steady track. Which is, I just said what y'all said in a different way.
Yeah, but 100% correct. And as you were saying that, it reminded me of the Lego brand, which in the 1990s was really getting, it had been such a successful brand for such a long time. And, of course, it originated in Central Europe. And what was going on in the early 90s and 80s was there was all of this electronic technology, games, Nintendo, and things were being played, and that was diverting young adults, through the parents. And so Lego thought, okay, we have to diversify in order to be successful. And they started getting to all these different things that were not their core, and they almost went out of business. And then they brought in Martin Lindstrom, who's a phenomenal brand strategist, and asked him to help them think about their brand. And he got down to it, and he really did some great research, and he realized that the Lego brand could coexist with what was being generated in the world in that time. And they got back to their basics. And when they did that, they resurged in a big way. And of course, we know Lego today to be tremendously successful. And they do a lot of licensing, right? They'll license with Star Wars brand, and they create these amazing ships. But for a time period there, they were lost. They didn't know that they needed to stick to their roots, and they started doing things that were wrong, and they almost went out of business. But fortunately, through some good guidance with Martin Lindstrom, they went back to their roots, and they became even more successful. So I think your point, Bob, is absolutely well said, and it's critical even for established brands to realize, don't lose sight of what you started, why you do what you do, and then just double down on that in a meaningful and thoughtful way.
I've been in Chick-fil-A meetings where they kind of got sidetracked and listened to people say, "Don't forget the chicken." It's we've got to remember what the core focus of the brand is, and if we don't have it clear in our own minds, we're certainly not going to be able to communicate it.
That's right. I mean, especially in a world like today where there's so many things taking up our mind share, for big brands, they're walking this tightrope. And if they lost touch with why they do what they do, which is such a critical part, that's what Simon Sinek talks about, start with why. If you lose touch with why you're doing what you're doing, then all the how and the what get distracting, and then you end up doing foolish things. But if you remember, why did we create what we did? What are we trying to do in the world? As you're doing, Johan, with Entness, or Bob, you're doing with the Fitz brand, or what we're trying to do with Brand Alive. If we stay true to that, we're going to find those people that resonate with what we're doing, and we're gonna make our mark, and we're gonna have significance in a way that's meaningful in the lives of those that participate in our brands. I 100% agree with that. Anyone else have any thoughts today, or in general about brands, that they find addictive, that they love, that they can't be without?
I do, yes.
Michael.
I really appreciate the case studies that you brought in today, as always. I think they're really gear one to explain and to go into detail what you're trying to get at. But specifically today, you brought in from Chick-fil-A to Minecraft and Legos, and then science fiction, Star Wars. A lot going on. There's a lot of creativity with that. And specifically page 59, that second paragraph where you mentioned about the rough cut of Star Wars. That 2.5-hour showing where Peevers observed that the children were engaged, which typically previous to that, they weren't engaged for that long. Children don't happen to have that attention span, right? So my question off of that is, are children, do they tend to be a good barometer for measuring brand addictiveness, such as this example? Because if you look at, we refer to that childlike self, right? Get to your childlike self and that creative part of ourselves. So again, do children tend to be a good barometer when measuring brand addictiveness overall?
Wow, that's a great question. Gosh, Michael, thank you for asking it. As I think about what you're saying, I think in some ways they could very well be. I mean, I'm gonna have to think about the property and what we're asking the children to engage in. But I do think that, that childlike curiosity is in all of us. And if we're willing as adults to let that curiosity surface, then we can enjoy some of the things that we really enjoyed as children. So I'm going to answer the question partially by saying I believe very much so. And certainly Peevers saw that with the Star Wars brand. He thought, wow, this is way beyond adult viewing. Kids are going to be consumed by this. And that's powerful. But I would also throw it out to the group and say, the rest of you, what do you think about what Michael raised about using children as kind of a barometer for addictiveness of certain brands? Any thoughts?
It would depend on what you're trying, It depends on your market. Are they your market? Is that what you even? I don't think they would be a good one for Starbucks.
Yeah.
Right. That's important, right? What is your target? Who is your target audience? What is it that you're asking them to consume? So it's going to apply in certain places and absolutely not in others. But to see a child engaged in a deep way would probably say that they're tapped into something, because typically they don't have the ability to stay connected to something for an extended period. Were you going to share something on that, Johan?
No, I just wanted to say basically the same as Bob. I think it definitely depends on what kind of product or service it is that you're intending to sell and so on there. But yeah, I think that's it. It's a difficult one, I think. And for my brand, I think it's also not really the way that I want to go. Of course, entrepreneurs is still a more adult game, if you will.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Any final thoughts before we close today? Well, I'm thrilled that everyone was on the call today. I really am enjoying this. Hopefully you saw some value. We will be posting this recording onto our YouTube channel for those who might have wanted to come today and couldn't participate. If you know anyone, please share that with them. And of course, we'll be sharing an email around that same information. We're going to send out a survey asking for feedback. One of the questions, and we didn't get in this past one, but we'll get into the next, is around frequency. We've enjoyed every 2 weeks, but we want to hear from you whether or not that works well. So please let us know your thoughts. We'd love to have your input to make this better. But thank you so much for today, for participating. And please reach out with any thoughts on things that we can do to create a more meaningful, more valuable experience for you. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, however long that is, no matter where you're coming from. Thanks so much. So I ask you, what can you do today to make your brand come alive in the hearts of those who experience it?